everyone for coming. We have a fully packed rooms here and a fully packed schedule. So I want to start on time. My name is Rachel Tausendfreund. I'm the Senior Fellow for U.S. and Transatlantic Relations here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. And this is the third event in our Remaking America series and the last event before summer. The Remaking America series is a cooperation with the Cluster of Excellence Contestations of the Liberal Script, which from now on I'm going to call Scripts, with the Freie Universität in Berlin. And in fact, this event is a twofer because it's also the second event in the Scripts series Focus USA or Brennpunkt USA. And I had the privilege of being at the first event. So on behalf of our partners from Scripps, I welcome you here to this event. The intense interest in the event leads me to believe that actually no one needs an introduction for our speaker, but as the host and moderator, it's my job. And I don't want to be accused of laziness. So we have the privilege tonight of hearing from Ambassador John Bolton, who is, without a doubt, one of the most prominent realist hawks in the American political scene. He has served for every U.S. Republican administration since Reagan, including as U.S. ambassador to the UN in George W. Bush presidency and as a national security advisor in Trump's first term, depending on how you count, the third or fourth, if you count the 7 days of Keith Kellogg. And I just learned a few minutes ago, the longest serving national security advisee so far of Trump 1 and 2. And as such, he is perfectly placed to talk to us today about Donald Trump and the future of U.S. foreign policy. So, Ambassador John Bolton, thank you very much. And please.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening, and thanks to all of you for coming out. I think there's a lot to discuss, and I timed this visit deliberately so there would be as much going on in the world as possible. I think I'd like to start by talking a little bit about Trump himself rather than the specifics of the issues, because I think it's important to understand that my view is that Trump is an aberration in American politics. He does not reflect a Zeitenwende in American foreign policy. I think he is unique. I certainly hope that's true. And so I think that a lot of the developments in policy, as troubling as they are, need to be understood in the context of what Trump is and what he's doing. Trump is not a conservative Republican. Many of his policies, and I could point to the tariffs as an excellent example, a liberal Democratic pro-labor union president would be undertaking. That's why Democratic criticism of the tariffs is so weak, because they wish they were doing it. They wish there were a Democratic president doing it. Trump has little or no sense of fiscal responsibility. Republicans used to be balanced budget people. I guess that was true in Germany too. That fiscal responsibility was correct. Trump has made and lost fortunes with other people's money, and having the taxing power of the United States give him the federal budget is the ultimate in using other people's money. The sad story is that so many Republicans in Congress have also lost their sense of fiscal responsibility. But these are not conservative Republican policies. And I could go on, but it illustrates the central point that's very hard for people who engage in policy making, study policy making, think that it's important, very hard to understand. Donald Trump does not have a philosophy. He doesn't do grand strategy. He doesn't even really do policy, as probably everybody here tonight understands that term. He has been described as transactional. That's correct. His decision making is episodic, ad hoc, disconnected. I said in my book that In his first term, he made thousands of decisions, the bulk of which I probably agreed with, but they're like a vast archipelago of dots out there. You can try and connect the dots if you want. Good luck. He can't connect the dots. He can't connect the dots between the morning and the afternoon. I can say, as somebody charged with supervising the National Security Council process, which was brought into being by an act of Congress in 1947 to try and help the president manage the incredibly new and complex responsibilities that a president has, that there is no decision-making process in a Trump administration. The fact that he has now made Marco Rubio the new Henry Kissinger by combining the National Security Council, the National Security Advisor job with the Secretary of State job, and fired most of the staff of the National Security Council, just gets rid of a lot of unnecessary bureaucracy from Trump's point of view, making it even harder to coordinate among the different agencies and departments of the federal government. Trump looks at every issue as a fresh issue. We learned in his first term that when he ran the Trump Organization before becoming president, that he did not make a daily schedule, that he would come into his office every morning and say, well, let's see what happens today, which is much the same way he ran the Oval Office. And it may be a way to make money in real estate in New York. It's not the way to run the United States government. So when scholars or analysts or other policymakers in foreign countries try to discern what's behind Trump's thinking, well, enjoy yourselves, but there isn't very much. This is, to say the least, frustrating for most people, and it leads to obviously less than optimal outcomes for the United States in a wide range of areas, not just in national security, but in domestic policy as well. In the foreign affairs sphere, you can see the impact by the way Trump looks at dealing with foreign policy problems. He does not think in strategic terms. He sees national security questions largely through the prism of his personal relationships with foreign leaders. He thinks if he's friends with a foreign leader, then U.S. state-to-state relations with that country are good. I would be the last person to say that personal relations don't have a role in foreign policy, but that's not how Vladimir Putin sees his advancement of Russian interest, or almost any other leader I can think of. Trump believes the corollary is true as well. If he has bad relations with a foreign leader, then we probably have bad relations with that country, which has shown up in a number of ways. It's very hard to predict what foreign leaders will have good relations with Trump and which will have bad. Some have been better than others. Some are kind of surprising. I can go down the list at some point if you're interested, but it certainly is the case that it's pretty uniform. He has a strong affinity for leaders of authoritarian countries, and people have asked, well, why is that? Why does he have trouble with Theresa May and Angela Merkel, but get along so well with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping? There are a variety of theories that try and explain that. One theory is that he's a Russian agent. I don't believe that's correct. If I had seen evidence of that in my 17 months as National Security Advisor, where I was with him every day, basically, I think I would have seen it. I think the explanation for his affinity there is more that he's what Vladimir Lenin is once said to have described as a useful idiot for the Russians. I think that's the role he plays. It's possible that there's some psychological issue going on there. I'll leave that to the shrinks in the audience. I don't pretend to be able to understand it, But Trump's a big guy, and he likes to do what big guys do. And big guys don't fool around with some of the major elements of what we consider to be constitutional democracy. And why a president of the United States is envious of anybody else is hard for me to understand. But that's, I think, one reason why he enjoys speaking to Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. He thinks they're friends. When he met Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, for the first time in Singapore to discuss the North Korean nuclear weapons program, he said to reporters afterwards, "We fell in love." Well, okay. That's not how Kim Jong-un sees it. These are hard men, and they understand what their country's national interests are, and they pursue them. They pursue them vigorously. Our president goes into meetings with these people totally unprepared. He doesn't read the briefing papers that we at the NSC routinely wrote for him. When Trump went to the famous Helsinki summit meeting with Putin, he had been at Turnberry, his Gulf estate in Scotland, for a few days after the NATO summit, where he almost withdrew, and meeting with Theresa May, the Prime Minister of the UK at that point. And on the flight between Scotland and Helsinki, I briefed him for the first time on strategic nuclear weapons questions, which lasted about 15 minutes while he was watching a FIFA soccer championship. Fortunately, Trump and Putin didn't discuss strategic nuclear weapons. I had a brief conversation with Putin myself, and that was the end of it. I always considered a meeting or a telephone call between Trump and Putin or Trump and Xi that didn't result in anything as a major success. This is how Donald Trump approaches his responsibilities as president. So when you look at what he's doing in Ukraine, when you look at what he's doing in the conflict in the Middle East, when you see how he deals with China, keep all this in mind. It was hard for me to grasp this, although working with him day to day, it was pretty obvious pretty quickly. It's very hard for anybody else to grasp it, and I can understand that. People say, surely the President of the United States is not making decisions on the basis that you described. And I will tell you exactly, that's just what he's doing. So considering all the factors at stake here, with so many controversies swirling, with the NATO summit meeting coming up next week, this is a very unnerving period for a lot of people, and I can just tell you that it's unnerving even for a lot of Trump supporters in the United States. I do not think that he has transformed the Republican Party. I don't think he's going to transform American international economic policy. I think that there have been already a lot of bad decisions made, but it's a mistake in Europe in particular to conclude from the evidence that we have that major changes are happening. It's critical for Europe to remember that the world's not going to end in 43 months when Trump's administration is over. Don't act that way. There will be a future. And think about how to minimize the damage that Trump is causing in the next 43 months and how we're going to repair it after his second and final term is over. And I think if we keep that perspective, we can actually find ways to get through the next 43 months that will minimize the damage. I'm at the moment very optimistic. Tomorrow is the end of his 5th month. We're more than 10% of the way through. So we're on the downhill slope here. And that's the way we need to look at it. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here this evening, and I look forward to the discussion that's about to begin. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. As you will have noticed already from these brief remarks, Ambassador Bolton was the longest serving national security advisor, is now one of the most vocal critics of Trump. And he mentioned the book, which I have here, the German version of, a slim beach read, as you see. But worth all of the pages in terms of details. Joining us now on the stage are two panelists for the rest of the conversation. Professor Lora Ann Viola is our partner from the Scripps project. She's on the executive board of the Scripps cluster. She's also a professor at the politics department of the John F. Kennedy Institute at the Freie Universität Berlin. She received her PhD and master's in politics and international relations, political science and international relations from the University of Chicago, and her bachelor's from Columbia in New York City, which we've all heard of now if we hadn't heard of before. It's been in the news a bit. Her research focuses on the development and design of international institutions, international relations theory, and U.S. foreign policy. Thank you very much, Lora Viola. And to her left is Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff. He's the Otto Wolff Director at the DGAP, an expert on German foreign policy and transatlantic relations, a former German presidential advisor, and also my boss. Thank you both for joining us. So I'm going to start with you, Lora. Ambassador Bolton ended on an optimistic note, right? 10% done already. Trump's an aberration. He hasn't transformed the Republican Party. And there's going to be a kind of reversion to something like normal, perhaps, after the Trump administration. How do you see it?
Yeah, thanks so much, Rachel. And thank you for inviting me and for being here. And thanks, Ambassador Bolton, for those, I think, very valuable insights from the inside. And I think, from what we've seen, there is a real sense from the outside looking in that it's erratic, that it's chaotic, that there's a lot of instability in policymaking. At the same time, I would disagree with that Trump is an aberration. And in particular, I think that if we look for lines of coherence, you sort of challenge us to look for some lines of coherence, I'm not sure it's in the day-to-day business of Trump's politics. I think that there are, though, if we sort of zoom out from that day-to-day politics, there is several lines of coherence in the Trump administration. And I think that one very important line of coherence in the administration is a twin move to erode the state and to concentrate executive power. And I think this sort of aligns well with the picture that you've also told us about the Trump administration. I think Trump and the administration, also very much in the spirit of Project 2025, is building a presidency that's unconstrained by legislative and judicial restraints, and also by professional bureaucracy. We've already heard about his disdain for bureaucracy. And I think, that has implications for domestic politics, for sure, but also for foreign policy. And I think that the sort of hollowing out of the Department of Defense and the State Department is not just a matter of Trump's personality, but there is a systematic and intentional approach to that hollowing out. And in addition to that, I think that the weak state apparatus and the concentration of executive power plays very much into this personalization of politics. And the importance of personal politics to the president. We've seen it in many different ways in the personal fealty that he asks of the advisors around him, in the way that he's tried to personalize and also politicize the military, I think, recently, and his personalized way of deal making, which we've also heard. And I think this concentration of power is not even necessarily a new thing. I think that Trump has developed it along with a new cadre of people who have a coherent vision of what executive power should look like to a whole new extent. But I would go so far as to say that, there's a famous political scientist, Arthur Schlesinger, who wrote a book called The Imperial Presidency. And in The Imperial Presidency, Schlesinger says that the consolidation of executive power over time often goes through foreign policy. And I think that's something that we see in Trump, that he is not just sui generis, but he is part of a process that happened, I think, across the last few decades. And I would say We are living in a world that's very much made in the post 9/11 era, and in an era where a president like George W. Bush really started a new consolidation of presidential power with the use of executive orders, with a weaponization of law through, for example, the Office of Legal Counsel and the torture memos. And so I think that there's a whole new dimension that we're seeing now, but it fits into a legacy of this concentration of power and the personalization of power.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to collect both of the comments to your initial remarks, Ambassador Bolton, and then give it back to you if you don't mind. So, Thomas, from the German perspective, how has this first 10% been? And in the first Trump term, Germany was accused of utilizing strategic patience, just waiting it out, not deciding anything. Do you think that that's the right move for Germany now? And do you think that's what's happening, or is Germany already drawing some conclusions, and should it be?
I think we're hearing the advice that Ambassador Bolton has just given to be patient, or as he put it, not to over-conclude from the evidence, I think that was your term, is given to many here by a lot of people from Washington. And it would be, it's very hard sitting here in Berlin to be an armchair analyst and disagree with somebody who has been in the room and seen the gentleman up front and has seen it every day. So let me try to be cautious with that critique, but put a little drop into that argument. Because when you say that this president is not strategic, I think I would agree. But he does have a set of convictions that are eerily consistent over time, and have gelled in something within this administration that looks like a worldview, or appears to be one, at least when looking from here. It is very hard to overlook that an administration comes into being on January 20th in the inaugural speech to declare something of a hemispheric imperialism, to want to enlarge the United States as a declaration of intent. And when you start from there, and I think I would agree in your assessment, he doesn't understand alliances. What he does understand is national power. And therefore, it is not an alliance that protects security interests in Greenland, but it is national power, the power of the United States, that is necessary to do that, even though the alliance could provide anything you need in Greenland to the United States. So I think there is a coherence of thought in the sense that he believes in certain things. Tariffs is one of them. The idea of great powers, a balance of power. He wants to reset relations with Russia at the expense of Ukraine and Europe. Those are consistencies, I think, that German policy has to deal with. I can't just say, as a policymaker here, it's 40, what did you say, 40 how many months? 43 months to go, and we'll sit still. I think that would be a far too cautious approach to the attempt to one-handedly rip apart world order and world economic order. Therefore, you have, in a conversation before, you've criticized, and in interviews, you've criticized Chancellor Merz for his remarks about distancing from the United States, wanting more independence for Europe and certainly for Germany. For a good reason, I find to say that gives Trump a pretext to do just that. But if you're this country, you better be prepared, because the United States is turning into an unreliable ally, because I simply do not know what comes after Trump. Whether you're right, this is an aberration, and then what? It is clear that there is a secular change of foreign policy ideas in the United States. It's just not clear how it manifests itself from administration to administration. So one has to assume that there will be major foreign policy shifts from one administration to the other. And policy towards the United States will have to take that into account. It is not just about sitting in out. So the idea of being able to act on your own or on your own as Europeans, I think the damage that you think can be repaired is already done.
Thank you. So just to sort of summarize the points, what about the idea of executive power and the consolidation of executive power? Is this an aberration, or is this, as Professor Viola pointed out, perhaps a longer trend? And then to Thomas's point, I mean, I'm interested in general.
Well, let me answer that
Okay.
one. But
Never mind.
I'm glad you're refreshing my recollection, because there's a lot to answer that I probably don't have time to answer. Let me just say, I'm a conservative Republican. I'm a very conservative Republican, and I haven't changed my philosophy because of Donald Trump. That's an example of his aberrationalism. There are some people who have responded to him, as he said the other day, I made up the phrase, "Make America Great Again." I decide what's in it, and I expect people to follow me. That's not a philosophy. That's about Donald Trump's view of himself. And it has been conservative philosophy in the United States for decades to reduce the size of the government. My first campaign was for Barry Goldwater in 1964. And in his book, The Conscience of a Conservative, he wrote, in coming to the Senate, my aim is not to pass new laws, but to repeal old ones. That's my kind of guy. That's what we ought to do to the federal government. The authority of the regulatory state should be reduced because of what it does to the economy and to the liberty of the people. And it is time to restore executive authority within the executive branch. We developed the theory of what we call the unitary executive at the Justice Department, where I served under Ronald Reagan. And it stems from the Constitution itself, that damned Constitution that Americans keep referring to. Article 2, Section 1, first sentence says, and I quote, the executive power of the United States shall be vested in a president. Doesn't say in independent regulatory agencies. One Woodrow Wilson thinks up that concept later. The executive power is the president's power. It is checked by the legislative and the judicial power. That's how freedom is maintained. And the reduction of the administrative state, I don't think Trump will accomplish very much because he has a short attention span. And the administrative state, if nothing else, is a long-term proposition, and they know it, and they've been very successful. There will be some victories in the Supreme Court for Trump, which are long overdue. The president's power to remove officials exercising executive functions, which is inherent in being the repository of executive power. We will see the independence of the regulatory agencies, I think, ended soon, and that's long overdue. So I think drawing other conclusions from this are mistaken. The independence of the judiciary is holding firm just fine, just fine. Trump is pushing the edges of it. He will test it. There's no doubt about that. But I don't see any reason to think that the third branch of government is going to do what he wants it to do. So I think this there's a sense of hysteria among some people in the United States that there's an existential threat to democracy. I don't see it. The Constitution is strong. Our institutions are strong. We've survived with the oldest written constitution in the world. That's not bad. And so there have been challenges from other presidents, but let me tell you, Donald Trump is no Catalan, no Sulla, no Pompey. He's certainly not Julius Caesar. I think the Republic is in good shape.
Again, very nice optimism. Let's see if the optimism carries over to some of the points Thomas raised about. I mean, first of all, I'd be interested in your opinion on how interested Trump is with for a reset with Russia at the cost of Ukraine and maybe the European partners. And what do you make of this sort of hemispheric imperialism that we're hearing from Trump? And by the way, if you could also answer the question, which I have to answer all the time, is Trump going to actually invade Greenland? That would be helpful, because then I'll just...
Sure. Sure. I'm actually an expert on Greenland from his first term, so I'm happy to discuss this at whatever length you want. Let me just say the invasion of Canada was not raised during his election campaign. It was news to everybody, including many people on his staff. He never mentioned it in the first term that I'm aware of. Where did this come from? Well, I think it's because he disliked Justin Trudeau, the prime minister. And I can give you many bases for why that's true. And it is the ultimate act of trolling for our friends in Canada for Trump to call him Governor Trudeau of the 51st state. He probably thought it would give leverage in the tariff negotiations, but I'll just explain for any Republican with a brain, having Canada become the 51st state is a disaster. Those people are liberals up there. You know, number one, it wouldn't come in as one state. It's too big. It'd come in as 3 or 4 states. There'd be 8 new Democrats in the Senate. God knows what the Democratic majority in the House would look like. I love Canadians. I want them to stay Canadian. You know, if there's any problem, really is it's out in Alberta, where they just had the second Kananaskis G7 summit. I went to the first in 2002. It's a beautiful place. Alberta may secede from Canada. That's their problem, not ours. There's nobody in the United States encouraging the breakup of Canada. We tried before. Back then we called it the 14th colony. It didn't work out so well. As far as I know, the only person who's raised that question seriously in the past 200 years is Donald Trump. Have you heard him raise it recently? No. Now he's got to deal with Mark Carney, who, whatever else one might say, is a serious person. He's probably the only person I know of who's been central banker of 2 separate governments in contemporary times. I think Trump may actually respect him as somebody from a business background. I don't think you're going to hear anything more about the 51st state. I think Carney handled his first meeting with Trump in the Oval Office with great skill, and I think Canadians can rest easy that the 101st Airborne is not about to drop on Ottawa. On Panama, where he talked about getting the Panama Canal back, but this is a good example. In the Carter administration, when that treaty was negotiated, I would have voted against it. I would never have given the Panama Canal back, but it's a little bit late now to talk about it. The treaty itself, which the Senate approved, gives us all the authority we need in a real defense contingency where the canal might be threatened. The relatively new president of Panama had asked for assistance from the military and our Homeland Security Department before Trump erupted, asked for assistance to close the Darien Gap between Panama and Colombia to prevent would-be immigrants to the United States from walking across Panama to get to Mexico, to get to the Rio Grande. First time the military has been invited back in since the 1979 treaty. Trump all but obliterated that by what he said. I think actually Marco Rubio put those negotiations back on track. It turns out Panama doesn't like people walking through Panama on the way to the Grand Canyon any more than we like them walking across the Grand Canyon. So we've got a community of interest there. And Greenland, you know, I think we could have solved this problem in 2019 if only Trump had not kept talking about it. The issue was somehow leaked into the Wall Street Journal. The Prime Minister of Denmark at the time, who's still Prime Minister today, said it was absurd to think that the United States could buy Greenland. Trump was then asked about that at the White House, and he said, she's a nasty woman for saying that. And I had a trip planned to meet with her to talk about Greenland. That was the end of that, and nothing happened during the Biden administration. Here's the scoop. Greenland is part of the North American landmass. The capital of Greenland, Nuuk, is closer to Washington than it is to Copenhagen. The shortest distance between Greenland and America is shorter than the distance between Greenland and Denmark. And I personally would welcome American sovereignty over Greenland. But the issue is security. Sovereignty could imply security, but it is not a necessary condition. America has been interested in Greenland for a long time. It turns out Donald Trump did not discover Greenland. In 1868, I think the research that my staff did in 2018 when this first came up, William Seward, Secretary of State in the Civil War and the aftermath, who had purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867, approached Denmark in 1868 and offered to buy Greenland. And they declined for reasons best known to them. In 1914, America purchased the Danish Virgin Islands from Denmark to guard the approaches to the Panama Canal with the approach to World War I, and also asked to buy Greenland again, and the Danes again declined. In World War II, before Pearl Harbor, we had American Marines and Coast Guard in Denmark to help safeguard the North Atlantic convoy routes, the government of Denmark obviously being in exile. After Pearl Harbor, we had tens of thousands of people there. We built the airports in Greenland that are still in use. In 1947, Harry Truman tried again. He offered Denmark $100 million. They still wouldn't sell. So in 1951, we negotiated with Denmark the Defense of Greenland Treaty. And it's a great treaty, and it provides a basis to deal with the security threat now posed by China and Russia as the Arctic ice melts. The Chinese see themselves as an Arctic power, and what they imagine is their submarines and surface vessels going through the Bering Strait between Russia and Alaska and emerging in the North Atlantic. Think about that for a minute. I think there's a resolution to this crisis if we could get it out of the spotlight. During the Cold War, we had 16 American military bases on Denmark. It was the eastern anchor of the distant early warning line, which went through Canada. All of these things were done in complete cooperation with the government of Denmark and the people of Greenland, who didn't really have autonomy until fairly recently. And I think there's an answer there. There's no Trump doctrine. It's a series of neuron flashes. The Canadian neuron flash is flashed and it's gone. So is the Panama Canal, unless the Chinese try and take it over. And good luck with that. And Greenland, if Trump would just stop talking, we could negotiate a deal. What have I left out? Ukraine. Okay, look. As I said earlier, Trump sees international relations through the prism of his personal relationships with people. He believes he and Putin are friends. I think Putin thinks Trump is an easy mark, and he has manipulated him effectively, as a good ex-KGB agent knows how to do. By contrast, Trump has never had good relations with Zelensky. Trump knows that in 2016, Ukraine worked actively to support Hillary Clinton's campaign. He knows that. He's been told that by Rudy Giuliani and other Ukrainian experts. In the famous phone call in the summer of 2019, he wanted Hillary Clinton's computer server. He knows it's in Ukraine, and he wants it. And he hasn't gotten it yet, and he hasn't forgotten that. He associates Zelensky and the perfect phone call with his first impeachment. And Zelensky, despite heroic efforts, has has not been able to overcome the hole he was in without even knowing he was in it going back to 2019. The problem with Ukraine that Trump sees is not a realignment of relations with Russia. He doesn't really fully understand much about Europe. He asked John Kelly, one of his early chiefs of staff, at one point if Finland was still part of Russia. He doesn't really know much about the balance of power. When we were in England before the famous meeting in Helsinki with Putin, we were meeting with Theresa May out at Chequers, a beautiful house for British prime ministers out in the country. And they were talking about the Russian chemical weapons attack against the Skripals, two defectors from Russia that had occurred just a month or two before. And one of the Brits was saying, we regarded this as very serious. This is an attack using weapons of mass destruction by one nuclear power against another. And Trump looked at Theresa May and said, do you have nuclear weapons? So now he approaches Ukraine and the question of NATO, and he's told by people that NATO expanded and to the east and oppresses the Russians, and that they were considered an offensive alliance. When I know full well why NATO expanded. Countries in Eastern and Central Europe that were tired of being dominated by external actors pounded on the door when they had the opportunity and said, let us in. NATO did make a mistake in the expansion, as we left a gray zone between the eastern border of NATO, if you will, and the western border of Russia. In that gray zone are Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine. And it was an area for Russia to exploit, which it's been trying to do, and which the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014 was designed to make it not a gray zone anymore. What Trump doesn't see any value in defending Ukraine is because he doesn't understand how alliances work, and he particularly doesn't understand NATO. His view of NATO is totally transactional. It's the same transactional view he has of bilateral alliances with Japan and South Korea. And in the case of NATO, it's roughly this. We defend Europe, we don't get anything out of it, and they don't pay us anything. That is not the way NATO works, in my view. At least I don't think that's the way it works. But in part, it's been obscured in the wake of the end of the Cold War because people thought that victory in the Cold War meant the end of history, as some talked about it. We were going to have a peace dividend. We could all cut our defense budgets, which we all did, and we're suffering for that now. And in the United States, having won the Third World War of the 20th century, we lost a whole generation of politicians who never had to make the case to the American people that a strong defense, a strong American presence in the world was something that we did in our own interest because it made us safer. We weren't out defending all these countries as an act of charity or because we're nice people, although we are. We're doing it because it's in our interest to do so. It makes us safer when the alliances work. Nobody has made that case effectively for 30 plus years, and we're suffering as a result of it. And I'll just say one other thing for the professor's benefit. We're suffering because of liberals in the United States who constantly talk about how wonderful the democratic world is. And people in the United States respond by saying, yeah, but what good is that to us? That's what Trump plays into. The answer is the liberal alliances like NATO make us stronger. If we had politicians that were willing to say, we're not doing this, as I said, for charity, but because it's in our interest, it would be a convincing argument to the American people. When Biden said we need to aid Ukraine, it was like Woodrow Wilson in the defense of democracy again, make the world safe for democracy. Remember what Theodore Roosevelt's response to that was in 1917 when he said, our purpose in coming to the defense of Europe is to make the world safe for America. That's what NATO does. That's what our bilateral alliances do. And if people would simply make that case, I think the isolationist disease, which recurs from time to time in American history, would disappear again.
Thank you very much. I'm going to throw it back to Professor Viola in a second. I have just one sort of note for the audience. I'm going to throw it back to the professor, and then we're going to open it up also very shortly to your questions. So start getting them ready. And also, you're going to see me exit, and Thomas is going to take over for the audience Q&A because I had a prior commitment that I could not move that predates Mr. Bolton's trip to Germany. So, Lora Viola, what do you think about the narrative problem, and what about this isolationist, I think you called it a disease that pops up there?
Okay, so I'd like to come back and draw a relationship between the expansion of executive power and the rise of the kind of sort of what you describe as sort of an unhinged personal politics of Trump, a politics of the United States that's sort of that's at the whim of his particular foibles and weaknesses. And I think that those two things are not unconnected. I think that the risk of a system of checks and balances that overemphasizes the executive, or the balance of power, which I think you're absolutely right, there is, the branches of government are only co-equal in their standing, not in their actual powers. And the rest is a matter of politics. And as a result of politics, we have a sway towards the executive branch. But that means that the government in general is much less able, or runs a higher risk of having exactly this kind of personalist politics. And that's the way in which I don't think that Trump is an aberration. He might be a useful fool also for others in the American administration. But, you know, what scholarship shows is that the rise of this kind of personalized, concentrated power has consequences. It means that we have leaders who are less constrained, who are more able to use force, and especially if an enormous force capabilities such as the United States is at their disposal. And also that this personalized politics leads to a show of force and use of power to enhance personal standing. And this is the kind of politics you get when you have a concentration of power in the executive that is no longer constrained by a bureaucracy or by other branches of government. And I would just say that if that's true, and if the scholarship is true, then I think that this idea of isolationism is actually a red herring. I think that if you look empirically, neither in the first Trump administration nor in the second was Trump truly isolationist. And even though we have lots of discussions about the isolationist wing of the party, I don't think we can see tariff politics as isolationist in any way. I don't think that we can see the United States' involvement in conflicts across the world as isolationist in any way. It's a different kind of politics, and politics has been done in the past for different purposes. But I don't think that the United States has been any less interventionist. And from a political science perspective, it's important to note that the United States has actually never been isolationist, and there's no such thing as a return to isolationism. If we look from the period 1776 to 1945, the United States was just as expansionist in military terms and economic terms. There's a good reason for that, a structural reason, which is that the United States' structural power position means that it is engaged in the global world and cannot help to be that. I think a very good example of that is the discussion right now of the United States' involvement in Israel and the Israel-Iran war, because the United States has the capability that that Israel desires. And as a result of that, no matter what Tucker Carlson says, the United States is a key player in this conflict. And so the structural power position means that there is no isolationism even under Trump.
Okay.
Can I just
yes,
that, because
let me just having switched roles here, being your moderator now, introducing myself as your moderator. We want to get to folks in the audience. I understand this is a philosophical grand game between executive power and less so. So if you can.
I agree entirely that America has never been isolationist. And this is an interesting agreement between the two of us. I think we've always been looking outside. We just weren't always looking to Europe. we were building what Jefferson called the Empire of Liberty on the continent of North America, among other things. But the isolationist tendency has existed throughout history, and it's reflected now not just in Trump, but in J.D. Vance in this famous Signal chat group, where he said, with respect to whether we would go after the Houthi rebels in Yemen, I don't see why we have to pull Europe's chestnuts out of the fire again, or whatever it was. That is the instinct. Why do we have to do it? And it is reflected in many respects in what Trump is doing in Ukraine and in a variety of other contingencies.
So we haven't heard the term, I mean, thankful that the Middle East just came up sneaking through the back door. Haven't heard the term NATO summit coming up next week. Haven't heard a whole lot of things. Ukraine has been mentioned. So there's a lot to ask about foreign policy, also contemporary. So please do fire away. We have two, Tanya Bertzel, the gentleman in the back, and then we'll take the next couple. We'll do two at once, so you'll have a chance to answer two.
Okay, thank you very much. Your optimism about the resilience of the U.S. Constitution is very refreshing, and I tend to agree. I think, was it rumors about the death of American democracy, maybe a bit premature. But I'm not so sure about your optimism about the Republican Party, right? Because, I mean, there is an argument that the MAGA movement has taken over the Republican Party, and this is the result of an ideological change within the Republican Party that has been going on for more than 2 decades. And now there are sort of different factions, right? The populist conservatives, the alt-right, the integralists. I mean, so I wonder, my question is, how much is actually left of the Republican Party you still claim to be a proud member of?
Well, I think
before you answer, let's take two. Here's a second one, the gentleman in the back.
Thank you, Ambassador Bolton. So the way that you've framed...
Introduce yourself.
Sorry, Malcolm Jorgensen from the Max Planck Institute for International Law. So the way that you've framed this situation is to create some distance, essentially, between yourself and the Trump administration, that your ideas haven't necessarily fed into the current era, that the president is unstrategic, for instance. But I would invite you to reflect on the way that some of the positions you might have taken over the years created the ground for someone like Trump to take them to their fullest extremes. So, for instance, a hawkish position on Iraq in 2003, the kind of ideas there, if taken unstrategically, can lead to the kind of thinking of Trump. And then just to take a specific example, I believe that it was in the first term you said, we're not afraid to use the term Monroe Doctrine in this administration. And that then invites thinking about hemispheric security and the kind of ideas that the Trump administration now talks about, both in terms of an American sphere of influence, but also then that can support a Chinese or Russian sphere of influence. I just asked whether you could think about the way that these ideas have contributed to the current discourse.
Right. Well, to take the question of the Republican Party first, I think there's good news and bad news if you look at feelings of Republicans in Congress, and I think that you can see that many Republicans don't necessarily agree with Trump, but they're afraid to speak out against him. I find this very distressing. I think we need more dissent, but they're afraid of being primaried. For many people in safe districts, the November election's irrelevant. You have to win the primary. And they're worried that if they object to a particular Trump position, that he'll run a Trump loyalist against them, and they'll be defeated. But they don't. They wish they could speak out, but they're not willing to do so. So that's the good news and the bad news. They don't believe in it, but they're intimidated. It's not a profile in courage, but I still think it's preferable to the alternative. And I think there is evidence just today in the Washington Post poll that they took about potential use of force against Iran, which showed actually by almost 2-to-1 people at this point oppose the use of force on the total national sample. But if you look at the party affiliation, it looks like the parties before Trump. So among Democrats, 9% support the use of force against Iran, 67% oppose, and 24% are unsure. Among Republicans, at a time when Trump has not stated a position, unless he did in the past 15 minutes, and people didn't really know what direction he was going to go in, asking Republicans, 47% supported the use of force, 29% opposed, 24% unsure. So that is a kind of a control group before Trump makes up his mind, and it shows what the traditional split between Republicans and Democrats would be, with Republicans taking a more forceful position and Democrats taking a less forceful position. I think when the Trump aberration leaves the scene, it will snap back, and we'll see a reversal in many respects, and I think some of it could be starting now with the tariffs, because the tariffs are contrary to basic conservative free market, free trade principles. And when Republicans, if the economy suffers negatively because of the tariffs, when they begin to fear for their prospects next November, you could well begin to see some splits there. Now, on your question, what was it I did that led to Trump?
The kind of ideas that have been put forward over a number of years. So the strategic thinking you've had about spheres of influence and so on, and the use of American
on Iraq. Yeah, I did support the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. I support it to this day. I think it was the right thing to do. Donald Trump opposed it. So I don't see how my support for the war in Iraq leads to Donald Trump. In terms of spheres of influence, the Monroe Doctrine is a principle that many in Latin America actually support because they don't want external non-hemispheric actors interfering. And it's been a long tradition of American policy. And I think we did the best we could, failed ultimately, but the best we could for the people of Venezuela to overthrow the Maduro dictatorship, which had invited in China and Russia and through Cuban intervention. And I don't think it has any bearing on the strategic analysis in other places or what our position should be.
Thank you so much. It was very, very interesting and helpful. My name is Miriam Kellerhals. I'm a lawyer, and I'm a bit worried about the 43 months you're talking about. It's nearly 5 pregnancies. It's a long time. And I would like to know how you think, how safe we are with a nuclear umbrella of the United States here in Europe, given that Trump kind of adores or likes Putin. How likely will he really defend us? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I'm Siegfried Seidel, a long year member of Deutsche Gesellschaft. Can you say something about this new conflict in Near East? Especially what would be interesting maybe, how is the personal relationship between Trump and Netanyahu? Do you know something about this? And what would you predict how Trump will decide when it is the question to escalate, for example, in this Iran case? Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I think on the question of extended deterrence, there are always concerns that America might not be reliable when it comes to a choice between losing Chicago and losing Warsaw, for example. This has been true since the dawn of the Cold War. I don't think Trump has thought enough about it to have an opinion on the subject. As I said, my discussions with him on strategic weapons policy were pretty few and far between. I would be happy if he doesn't go to the NATO meeting next week. I would consider that a great success, assuming he sends Rubio instead of Vance. I think the larger question on the nuclear side is what to do about the rise of China as a peer nuclear power, because all of our decisions, beginning with all of our theorizing, all of our decisions on delivery systems, nuclear capabilities, how deterrence worked, how we dealt with arms control agreements, everything about that was developed during the Cold War was in the context effectively of a bipolar nuclear world. There were other nuclear powers, Britain, France, very nice, not really relevant to the big picture. And China was not a factor. And the other states not part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, Israel, India, and Pakistan, not factors in the strategic deterrent policy between the Soviet Union and the United States. But now China is on a very rapid expansion. By 2030, estimates differ, but they could have as many as 1,000 deliverable nuclear warheads. Others think it could be as many as 1,500, roughly up to the level of the United States and China, which means you now have a tripolar nuclear world, potentially complicated by the Russia-China axis. We don't know exactly how that will play out. But it's like saying instead of playing chess between two parties, we're now playing chess with three parties. And bipolar deterrence theory means essentially nothing. So the question we have to ask is, are we prepared to embark on an extraordinary expansion of our nuclear capability to be able to match two peer competitors simultaneously, or do we not? And do we have, will the extended deterrence work for all of our allies? And we're way behind in our thinking on that, way behind the Chinese, and we need a very serious priority to address that, because if it's perceived that the extended deterrent doesn't work, then countries will draw their own conclusions. There are serious discussions in South Korea now about getting their own nuclear capability. There are serious conversations about it in Japan. I'm sure you've seen Japan has announced it's going to double its defense expenditures from 1% to 2% of GDP in 5 years, assuming growth in GDP. That means much more than doubling. Will make Japan the third largest military in the world after the United States and China, because they are worried. They live in a neighborhood with Russia and China, not to mention North Korea. So that's why understanding this China-Russia axis really is very important for everybody, including in Europe. And I do think we're behind on that question, and I would worry about it. So on the Middle East, you know, if you had to pick one campaign theme that Trump mentioned over and over again, it was end the endless wars. So here we are contemplating destroying the Fordo nuclear uranium enrichment facility. I'm all in favor of it. I would have joined with the Israelis at the beginning of this attack. I've been recommending it for close to 20 years. It's long overdue. The delay is proof of Churchill's famous comment about the unteachability of mankind. When we could have destroyed it at much less risk and much lower cost, we didn't act, and now we're paying the consequences for it. We're paying the consequences in a way for not doing it to North Korea earlier as well. I don't know what Trump is going to do. He's not motivated by a strategic assessment of what's going on here. He knows, he has said many times, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. But he's also being told by people like his vice president and his director of national intelligence that he shouldn't be doing it. I think what he wants to do right now at some point is he wants to win a Nobel Peace Prize. He tried in Ukraine, Russia, that somehow that didn't work out. I can't imagine why. He's tried between India and Pakistan after the recent terrorist attack in Kashmir. That didn't work out. He thought he could bring the Iranians to a deal, maybe get the Nobel Peace Prize for that. That didn't work out. And Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize, and he hasn't gotten one, and he's really upset by it. He did not, I think, participate in any way in attempting to deceive the Iranians by dragging out negotiations so Israel could get prepared. Last Thursday night, Marco Rubio issued a statement saying it's entirely an unilateral Israeli action, and did not have any customary words about U.S. support for Israel. Now, Trump probably didn't read that statement, but Rubio would not have put it out in those terms unless Trump approved it. So he was standing away from Israel. Next morning, he wakes up, it looks pretty good. It looks like the Israelis are having some success. So the first thing Trump says in some tweet is, of course, he supports the Israeli action. Later in the day, he characterized the initial results as excellent. By the end of the day, he was saying the stock market would go up. He's trying to get in front of the parade. remember, Donald Trump is a winner. He never loses. He's always a winner. And now he's trying to decide who the winner is going to be so he can get out in front and say, see, I supported you. I don't know what he's going to do, honestly. And I mean, I've seen the direction of the comments, but I think it's accurate that he has not made up his mind for sure. And sometimes even when he makes up his mind, it doesn't last. So, stay tuned.
Now, Ambassador Bolton, we've run out of time, but if you allow overtime, I would allow one more question and give that to the Vice President of this organization, Olivnika.
Thank you very much for the interesting talk. A lot has already been said on the Middle East. My question is on Gaza. What is your take on this, and what should be the U.S. position on that one? Thank you.
Well, I think Israel is correct to have as its objective the elimination of Hamas as a political and military force. I think the right of self-defense necessarily includes the right to eliminate the threat. That was certainly the position the United States took in World War II, and not just to respond proportionately when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. The history is very clear after that. I don't think the people of Gaza can ever have a future as long as the cancer of Hamas surrounds them. And I think that the weakening of the Iranian regime, which we've seen as a result of Israel's military action to date since October the 7th, has weakened Hamas and Hezbollah very substantially. The Assad regime has fallen. The Middle East is a different place. And if the further shock of destroying the Iranian nuclear program adds to the weakness of the existing Iranian regime and the Ayatollahs fall, I think that is the one chance you could have for peace and security in the Middle East, which will not exist as long as the Ayatollahs remain in power. So this is obviously a complicated subject. I don't think there is a two-state solution anymore, if there ever was. I think the only humanitarian thing for the people of Gaza is to find resettlement somewhere else. I would do that by abolishing UNRWA and replacing UNRWA with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees to handle the problem. The Palestinians, unfortunately for them, are the only major refugee population in the world since 1945 not to be handled by UNHCR. There's one other exception with the Cambodian refugees in Thailand and the UNBRO organization, but that was its own unique situation. But I think the humane treatment for the Palestinians is treat them like every other refugee population since 45. And UNHCR is the vehicle to do that. And we can say that UNHCR's record is it has never forcibly resettled anybody. And there are no permanent UNHCR refugee camps.
All right. Yes, that's a good idea. I think an applause. An applause to Lora Viola and Ambassador Bolton is warranted. I want to thank our panelists here, but I especially want to thank Ambassador Bolton for coming over to Germany, because there is a thirst for explanation of what's going on in the United States from folks from Washington. And there's also one, of course, from the Trump side. Now, you don't represent the Trump side, as we have learned over the course of this event, but your explanatory power and your analyses, I think, was very strong to this audience. So thank you very much for coming to the German Council on Foreign Relations.